Welcome to this presentation about MVC 1.0. I'll be showing some code, mostly in slides, but I'll show some live stuff afterwards as well, and a couple of demos. So what are we going to go through today? First, a little background. What is this JSR all about? I'll present the status of the JSR, where we are now, and show the demo and show you how to get started if you want to play around with it yourself. And then we'll sum it up afterwards. So who am I and why am I here? My name is Ivar. I'm a Norwegian. I work for a company called Cybercom in Sweden. I've coded Java since 1995. And I'm pretty sure you're aware of that today is Java 20 years birthday. So let's congratulate Duke with his birthday. I've coded Java professionally since '98. My daily work, I work as a consultant, but also have the opportunity to travel around to conferences and talk like I'm doing here today. I'm a member of the expert group for this MVC JSR, and that's why I'm here today. I'm also a member of the expert group for Java Security API, which is called JSR 375, maybe next year. So does everybody know what a JSR is? Yes. And the JCP, the Java Community Process, that's the organization that facilitates these Java specification requests. So that's enough about me, but so let's look at some of the background for this particular JSR, and that is JSR 371. What is it? Well, I'm pretty sure you've all seen the MVC pattern. And this is a pretty common way of drawing it. You're probably very familiar with it. The basics is that you have a controller class that updates the view based on the model, and etc. And there are different kinds of MVC out there. And one of them is what we call component-based MVC, or component-oriented. And that is a specific style of MVC that is made popular by component frameworks. And the special thing about these is that the controller is provided by the framework. So what's grayed out here is what you provide as an application developer. So in the application, you code the model and the view, but the controller is provided by the framework. Example of these are such as Java Server Faces, or JSF, Wicket, Tapestry, and those kind of frameworks. The other style of MVC is called action-based or action-oriented MVC. And the difference with these is that you, as an application developer, provide the controller and define it in your application. And examples of this are frameworks like Struts 2 or Spring MVC, and also this MVC specified by JSR 371, because there are no standard Java EE implementation of action-based MVC yet. But the good news is that we're doing it now. And then why are we doing it? And why now? If we have been fine so far, I mean, Java EE has been around for a long time, why now? Why didn't we do it before? And part of the question to why are we doing it now is that the community clearly wants MVC support in Java EE. More than 60% answered yes in the community study for Java EE 8. And there is apparently no favorite out of the existing MVC framework for how we should make it, since more than 50% answered not sure for where to look for inspiration. And more from the Java EE 8 study, you see that MVC is here, It has 8% of the support, and there are no other that are apparently really much bigger. So it's clearly wanted by the community. And one of the reasons to why is this a good time is that now we have the technologies for it. The Java EE platform in version Java EE 7 now provide us with the technologies that makes it possible to do MVC properly. And I'll come back to that later. And that brings us over to how are we going to do it? And that is what JSR 371 is all about. There is MVC for Java EE 8. It is going to be action-based. And it's not going to be a replacement of JSF. JSF is going to be developed further. And JSF is component-based, and MVC will be action-based. And the important thing is we're building on existing Java EE technologies. And that is why we're able to do it now properly. Because we have bean validation, we have CDI, we have JPA, we have facelets, we have JSPs. So the only thing we actually need to build MVC is some kind of controller, right? So who's in the expert group then? It's a group that is made up of people from Oracle, Red Hat, InnoQ, IBM, Calum, LifeRay, and 6 individual members. So it's pretty widespread and support from most of the industry. And let's look at some key decisions made by the expert group so far. And I actually should have written key decision here, because there's actually been one key decision that is more important than any other. And that is, we're building MVC 1.0 on top of JAX-RS. And there were long discussions in the expert group, should we build it on JAX-RS or should we build it on top of servlets? And the discussions were continuing for months until we decided on JAX-RS. And it was a vote in the expert group, and personally I think it's a very good choice. And one of the reasons for that is that we can reuse so much from JAX-RS and not write anything from the bottom up. So let's look at some code. First of all, the controllers. Say that you have a simple class called hello controller. And we want to make this a controller in the new MVC specification. Well, the first thing we need to do is to say that it's going to answer on this particular path. And this is the path annotation from JAX-RS. So if you've created REST applications using JAX-RS before, then you're pretty familiar with this one. So it's no rocket science here. And this is one of the advantages of building on top of JAX-RS. We're already familiar with this. We can understand what this does without actually reading any documentation. And if we want to have this particular JAX-RS resource to be a controller in the MVC pattern, in the MVC 1.0, we add the @controller annotation. And this is a new annotation in MVC. And if we put it on class level, like we've done here, that means that all the methods in this class are controller methods, all the public methods. I'll show you later that we can also annotate a single method with it. This that you have the MVC built on top of JAX-RS also makes it possible to have JAX-RS resources and your MVC controller in the same class. Whether that is a good decision or not, that's up to the developers. But if you want to, then you can actually have the same class to serve both your REST resources and your controller methods. So the controllers actually is pretty simple. It's a JXRS resource with some extra annotations. But look at how we render the views, or how we do the view negotiation. We have the controller, as we saw earlier, and then we add a method to it, and we can recognize the get annotation from JXRS. There's nothing new yet, and it returns a string. And since this is a controller, the default is that it will be it will return the correct content type. So you don't need to have produces text XML or whatever but you can put it on there. The JSR specifies support for JSPs and facelets currently. The reference implementation that we are developing along with the specification currently also supports timely, free marker, mustache, velocity. And you can also easily build your own templating engine and plug it in. There are other ways of doing this. Is you can also return a viewable rather than returning a string. And then you have this viewable class that encapsulates the view and how it should be processed. In this case, it's a JSP. You can also have another way of processing your view here. And there is more. If you want more control, you can actually use the response that we recognize from JXRS and actually set the response status and have the entity being the viewable. So this is when you want to have more control over how you create your responses. There's a fourth way of doing it, is that you can have a view annotation. And this is new for this specification. And the specification says that if you have a view annotation, or if you have a void return method for a control method, then you have to have a view annotation. If I return string here, or response, or viewable, I don't need the view annotation. For a void method, it's required. I can also put the view on class level and have all methods rendering to that view. So as you see, it's pretty flexible. And it's actually more or less just a JXRS as we know it, with 2 new annotations. So if we look at how the model will be in all this, we have our controller class, which has the @controller and @view annotations. And let's say we create a greeting class, which is a CDI managed class with request scope. And it just has getters and setters for the message. Then we can use this directly in the controller. And in this case, we set the message property on it. And in the view, we can access this like this. And this is a JSP example. So it supports CDI out of the box. And there is another way. If you have a view engine that doesn't support CDI, it is recommended that a view engine you provide should support CDI, but it's not. It's optional. So let's say you have a view engine that doesn't support CDI. There's a way around it, and we provided a models class. It's the same controller, but we put the message. It's more or less a map. And why it's called models and not model? Well, model was already taken by an annotation type for JSF, and you don't want to have name conflicts in the platform. And the way you use this in the JSP is just to access the message property from the models. That's pretty simple, right? Let's have a look at some code. Let's see. Is it readable in the back? Yeah. So this is a very simple counter, and as you see, it builds on Java EE 7. And until we have Java EE 8, we also need to tell it about the MVC, because it's not supported by Java EE 7. It's coming in Java EE 8. So we need the MVC API, and we need the reference implementation. And the reference implementation for MVC is called OSARC. And it will be a part of Glassfish when Java EE 8 launches. If we look at the controller, to be able to run this application, you need to have a nightly build of Glassfish to support the latest Jersey version. But I'll show you later where you can download it. But it needs to be a nightly version. You cannot run it on the regular build. And as you see here, this is a simple JAX-RS resource, but it has a controller annotation on class level, which means it's an MVC. And the rest of it is actually more or less, or is actually 100% JAX-RS, except the models injection. So here it actually listens to a path parameter and just sets a counter on the model object and returns the view. And the view is very simple. It just shows count 4 and the count. There's a couple of other things here. Is that there is support for a couple of observers, or the events that CDI is throwing, so you can actually do things depending on these events. And here we've observed the controller matched event and the ViewEngine selected event. So I'll just log out that here a ViewEngine is selected and the controller is matched for this URI. And that we can see in the log when I run it. And this is, it's not very exciting actually, but you see it's actually counting, and you can see in the log that it says controller match for count Kiev, and it says engine is JSP ViewEngine. So if I had used another ViewEngine here, it would have matched for another ViewEngine. So you can actually do things based on these events. Another important thing to notice right now is that you actually need to have be in discovery mode all, but that is going to be fixed until it launches. So you need a beans XML file. Apart from that, you can just go on as usual. Look at another example. It has exactly the same configuration, but it has a little bit more exciting controller. And this controller listens to hello, and this one you can recognize from the slides. I use the models and not the CDI version here, and also inject validation result. And validation result is also something covered by the specification, and it enables us to use bean validation to validate form parameters, for example. So here I have a post, it listens to the HTTP post, and it takes in a bean parameter, and it validates it. And this hello bean is just a simple bean that I have some bean validation on, and it just has getters and setters, and it's just populated from the form. And it goes through and check that if it is failed. And here you can see I'm just using the validation results that I have injected here. I can use it directly here because I have a bean validation, and I said that this is going to validate on execution. You can also use XML configuration of bean validation if you like. And then I just loop through the validations and put it to the model. In this case, normally you do something more clever, obviously, but here for demo, I just add what parameters and the message I get from bean validation. I send a bad request and redirect to the same form. There's nothing magic going on here. If it's not failed, then I put the name I get from the form and just return another view. So here I'm using the response way of returning. And the initial get is using this view. Let's look at the JSP pages. And it's very simply, it has a form, and it has the first name and last name attributes. And here I just display the messages if I get some error messages from bean validation. So if I run this one, you can see if I submit with empty here, I get the bean validation. It says size must be between 1 and 16 for first name and 1 and 24 for last name. And that is what I've said in the bean validation. And obviously this is not something you would present to your user, but for demo it's pretty good. So if I fill in one of them, it validates the other one, and it goes. So out of the box with just a very simple, and this validation style of doing things is something you would do in a JAX-RS resource as well. So the only thing you actually done here is to add controllers and different views to return to. Otherwise, it's pretty simple. So what if we compare this to, for example, Spring MVC? Is anyone using Spring MVC here? Yeah? Okay. Let's look at the exactly same application in Spring MVC. See, it's exactly the same form. And the controller method looks very much the same. It has the Spring controller. Now it's not the MVC controller. It's a Spring component. It also has a validator and auto-variate that's comparable to the inject validation result in MVC 1.0. And I map a post method to the hello resource. And I, more or less in the same way here, I say that it's a form I'm validating. I'm having a validated hello bean in, and this validated is a Spring annotation, and it supports bean validation. So the hello bean is actually exactly the same, and it has bin validation. And it also has 16 and 24, just as the other one. And more or less the same way as we loop through the validation results in MVC, here we loop through binding results, and I do the same kind of hack just to add the messages to the model and view. The difference here in Spring is that you have this model and view construct, where you add the model and say which view you want to return to. In MVC, you've separated it. But it's comparable to the models object, or the CDI, if you like to use that one. And I just return an error model or a hello model, depending on if it goes okay or not. And surprise, surprise, it does exactly the same thing. And if I write something, I can take one of them, it validates and it does exactly the same. And I enter it here. So it's, you see, it's if you're used to Spring MVC, the migration path to starting to use MVC for Java EE, it's very, very easy. Because it's just some concepts you have to use another class for. So it's very, very similar. If you want to, for example, try this out and look at the demos and look at more sources, you can download if you have Docker installed. Anybody using Docker? You know about Docker? Yeah? If you haven't tried it, try it out. It's cool. This Glassfish Ozark, you get a Docker container with a Glassfish nightly build and the reference implementation and a lot of examples bundled together. So if I run this one, now to save time, I already am running in the background, so I won't push it. But this command is on the Ozark webpage, I'll show it later. What you get there is a webpage with a lot of samples for the reference implementation. And you can click on them, you can see how it works. And you can also, if internet works here, you can go to the source code, which is at java.net, and see how this sample is implemented. So it's a very good source if you want to learn how to do things. So if you want to code your own MVC application, download this Docker thing, just run it and click around and see what you want to do, and it's there. And there are Timely, FreeMarker, and whatever examples you want to use. So you see, it's not a JSP. It's not a JFE, it's a FreeMarker template. So Ozark supports these. This is a recommendation to go in and look at. So. Okay, yeah. This is what we did, more or less. We created or looked at how to create an MVC project. We looked at a slightly more example with form and bin ventilation, and we compared it to Spring MVC. And we also showed some Docker or Ozark samples where you can get them. So what is happening now? Well, in autumn last year, we formed the expert group, and earlier this year, we published an early draft, and that's available out there. I'll show the link to it afterwards, but it's available on java.net and JCP's homepage. Later this year, we will release a public review. So if you have anything, comments, anything you want, have changed, ideas, whatever, it's just to contact us, and because it's not final yet. And it's not going to be final until Java EE8 chips. And the roadmap, as it looks now, in 2016, in Q8, we'll have the final draft. And then Java EE8 is supposed to ship in late 2016. And MVC will be a part of that. So you still have some time to come with input if you have anything you want to have done differently. As I said, OSARC is the reference implementation. You can download it from java.net, just Google it, or take it from this presentation afterwards. There you can find the link for the Docker and how to download that, or you can have a link to a nightly build of Glassfish you can actually run in your IDE. So to sum up, the strength of this JSR is that it builds on existing Java EE technologies. So if you know Java EE, like CDI and JXRS and beam validation, etc., it's very easy to get started with MVC because you already know all this stuff. It's just a little bit of new stuff. And two of these things are a new controller annotation and a new view annotation. And this JSR has, as we saw from the service, very strong community support. And when you see how easy, and it's kind of, it's a short specification, so just read through it and start playing with it. It's available out there. And to get started, you can have a look at the code and specification and everything on java.net. The reference implementation is at osarcjava.net. The specification is also available on GitHub. So if you want to fork it, play with it, do whatever, you can do it. It's probably more easy from GitHub than java.net. But it's mirrored out there, so just Google it on java.net and you'll find it. If you want to look at the sources from this presentation, you can Google up my GitHub account and just play around with it there. There are a couple of more examples as well, and I plan to add some as we go. There are also the other expert group members who also have some sample projects here and there. Among that, it's a to-do list, which is pretty neat. So just Google it. And that's actually what I had prepared for today. And I thank you very much for listening. It's a pleasure to be here in Kyiv. And I'll be around for the rest of the conference. And if you don't discuss anything, this JSR, other JSRs, Java in general, whatever, don't be shy, just approach me and we'll have a blast. So I think we have him. I think we have 10 minutes or so for questions, or if you want to go out in the sun, or I can show some more code samples if you want that.
How the views are resolved? So GSP names are resolved with location of GSPs. So is there some config?
No config. There is a ViewEngine. The ViewEngine for JSP specifies that it is in the views folder of the meta-inf folder.
So is it possible to configure, say that this part of views will be in some particular folder?
Yes, but that will depend on the reference implementation. You can also implement your own ViewEngine and plug it in. Okay. The question is, from my experience, would I use JSF or MVC for rich internet applications? Or
The purpose is different, but when is the right time to use JSF and when is the right time to use
okay. Yeah. I would, from my personal experience, we use actually JSF a lot, but we use it if it's a simple UI and if we have Java developers who are going to create a UI. And if it's a internal application or an administration UI, we just have to have simple forms, some export, import functionality, or like say you have a table of data and want to export it to a Excel sheet. It's so easy just to add in a prime facet component and use it. If I was making a end user application that was more heavy on the UI side, I wouldn't use a JSF. Then I'll probably use MVC when that's around. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any standard or common solution for security with MVC 1.0, or we just need to use any framework?
The question is if there are any support for security in MVC, and the support for security of MVC is the same as in the rest of the Java EE platform. So there's no specific stuff in this specification addressing security, and it shouldn't be, because that should be supported by the platform and Java EE security. But there is a JSR 375 which addresses the Java EE security and align it more across the platform than it is today. But today you need to rely on the Java EE security or third-party stuff like Spring security or others. Yes. Yes.
What about exceptions? Is there a way to handle that somehow, or it will be some a bit the same as in Spring when we have only runtime exception?
The question is the support for exceptions, and yes, there will be, and I didn't show any of that today. We can have a look at it afterwards, or you can browse into the OSARC examples. The specification also have a section on exceptions, and it builds on the JEECRS way of handling exceptions.
Does controllers support sessions?
If controllers support session scope, yes, I think I need to get back to that, but because we have discussions in the expert group which scopes we are going to support. There are people who, I'm definitely sure that session scope will be supported, but there are also other scopes, and we're discussing if we should introduce new scopes as well to support portals and like flow scope and similar. So there are discussions ongoing, so I can't give a 100% answer to that yet, but follow the mailing list and what we're doing. So there will be support for different scopes, yes.
Do you have any discussion regarding WebSockets in the scope of JEE specification about this?
Okay, the question is if we have any discussions about WebSockets. And in this MVC specification, no, we don't. But WebSockets is supported by Java EE, by a separate JSR. Okay, then thanks again.